Hello and welcome to another episode of the Unknown and Well-Known podcast. We have a very special guest with us today. He happens to be my batchmate from CMC Vellore. We have Paul Deepak here. Thank you for being here and we welcome you onto the show. As I've said before, this podcast is although it may be an amateur attempt, but it is a sincere attempt to help younger believers who are on their journey to making decisions regarding medical missions and the joining of medical missions. We have used the verse from Ephesians chapter 4, verse 12, which is for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ. So that is the underlying intention behind these talks that we have. And we hope that you will be benefited with the discussions that we have today as well. Dr. Paul Deepak joined with me in MBBS in Vellore in the year 2002, and then we went on from there. He went on to finish his MBBS and go to Bangalore Baptist Hospital to do a 2 year of a service obligation. And then he went back to Vellore. Initially joined general surgery, but then decided to change and shift gears and went on to do radiology. And I think following radiology, he went to the OTC or Chatram Hospital, the Christian Fellowship Hospital, to do a service obligation there. That was for 3 years, was it, Paul?
5 years of the obligation and then one more year.
So we'll have him talking about a lot of things about his experience through the mission hospitals, and then finally he's now ended up in CMC Vellore as faculty in the Department of Radiology, and so he'll talk to us even about life in Vellore as such. So thank you once again for being here, and we are right now in Narsapur Christian Hospital. This is the hospital where I am working. And so Paul, I would like to start off this conversation asking you about your experience through the mission hospital work that you were in. First you were in Baptist and then ODC. So would you like to talk about these two in contrast?
Yes, Baptist Hospital serves primarily a urban, semi-urban kind of population, and I think there is a lot of need in the urban setting to witness for Christian, mm, generally in Christianity, but especially in Christian medical work. So um, the challenges are quite different. So not only are we expected to serve people in fulfilling their needs, but if I may say so, we need to sort of sell ourselves to the crowd as well. But maybe like in some of the conversations we had, it's probably true in the rural setting as well, that people are not willing to just take us on our word, or uh, they want something more than just goodwill and good intentions. They actually want degrees and accreditations and things like that. So it's quite long ago that I can't remember much, except that I learned a lot of practical medicine while I was still in Baptist. And I had some really nice friends, seniors who were friendly, who helped me to realize some things about mission work, which, though I have not been back there again, I think I could not have learned it in a purely rural or predominantly rural setting like Southern Calcutta. So so
Straight
of
out
course
of
there is the contrast between the kind of population, um, but I should like to know what are the contrasts that you are thinking of.
yeah. So we've seen a lot of mission hospitals all over the country, across the country, shutting down. Like
Hmm.
we started off with maybe 800 of them, and now we're left with about 3 to 4. What I've seen in my experience of working in the mission hospital is that there are certain hospitals that are run by local churches or local church bodies, and there are certain hospitals like, for example, the EHA or the ODC hospital, which is run by a trust maybe or a group of
Hmm.
doctors or like an association. The hospitals which are attached to the churches have predominantly seen their end. They've not survived. But the other side, the EHA hospitals and the other hospitals seem to be doing better, or they have a longer lifespan. Do you think there's a difference here, or what do you think?
Well, yes, I think there is a difference. In my opinion, I think the main difference is age. Um, this is parallel to what has happened if you think of missions in general as well. So earlier on, at least within the Protestant church, missions were very church based. Like the Lutheran church came to Tamil Nadu with the English and all that. But as time went on, now we see that mission work is predominantly carried on by interchurch or interdenominational organizations. And they seem to be succeeding better than the church based missions were succeeding. So, Baptist Hospital, for example, in terms of medical missions, is very, very young. It was started in 1985. And usually, like we were already saying, I think the founders and the people who have collaborated with the founders or at least seen the founders in action firsthand are able to catch the vision and carry it on. But with every successive generation in leadership, there seems to be a dilution of, well, I wouldn't particularly, yeah, probably dilution, but also a multiplication of goals and objectives, and there's a diversification. The unity of purpose sort of goes down. So it wouldn't be so much in my mind as church based versus non church based, but simply much more to do with how old an institution is. And like in physical systems, I think entropy sort of builds up. So the hospital itself could adapt to new challenges and take on uh, to address more relevant, up-to-date needs rather than stick to the original vision. Like say, for example, if you're committed to be a leprosy hospital, then it is no fault of the institution that our relevance and work goes down. So that is certainly one thing. But I do think that hospitals tend to do better when they are run by medical people rather than by administrators, and certainly than by church people, because there is a very poor grasp of the subjective um, challenges that essentially whatever however we may try to work around it, patients primarily come to the hospital to see a doctor. Uh, the rest of it is just supporting that system for that doctor to be able to have a good output. So I feel that non-medical people trying to run hospitals either as administrators or as church leaders may never be able to treat them as anything beyond employees, and so that creates a conflict of interest uh, that that one needs to watch out against. So then, no wonder if it's a doctor-led initiative like EHA, they tend to do better because there is a lot of unsaid understanding that goes into how work is shared and how the institution is run.
But when you said about the initial purpose probably getting diluted,
Hmm.
was the initial purpose more centered around the services or the kind of services offered, or was it like a church coming into India in the early 1900s and then looking at offering service for the sake of evangelizing? Was that a kind of a
Hmm.
predominant outlook or the approach, and that hasn't stood the test of time? Is it that, or is it just about the service?
Hmm. Yeah, I do have some interest in Indian missionary history, and social engagement itself is was certainly not the first, not even one of the early ways in which mission work was. Like if we look at in South India, especially, if we look at the first missionaries were of course Roman Catholic, and then the Lutherans who followed. They all sought to engage the people in dialogue and debate, and what now we lost for maybe 200, 300 years, and finally with a camera we are back to a willingness to sort of disagree with each other. And medicine was also quite primitive back then, I think. So I think social engagement was particularly to do since the time of William Carey only, the father of modern missions or whatever, and the evangelical politicians in England at that time who sought to educate and improve the health. So if mission, so a lot of the mission hospitals when they started had no doubt in their mind that their primary purpose was to reach people with the gospel, and these were only ways to create opportunities for them to meet the people. And certainly it was not the most important way or the most sophisticated way, like sadly now it has become. So with independence, I think um, what also became an inevitability is mission hospitals uh, tend to want to become self-sufficient or independent in that sense, not only of foreign funds but also of the church, and that I think is, in my mind, it may not be something that God will see through, because like what point do we stop being primarily evangelical and become social? The line may be blurred, but I think there is a line, and then once that line is crossed, then also, like we have been talking before, with self-sufficiency comes the stress or the pressure or the burden to generate income. So more and more mission hospitals wanting to be self-sufficient are having to focus on income generation, which also intrinsically creates a lot of problems. Like it is perceived by those outside the mission hospital, but within the Christian community as a lucrative job opportunity, and by within those within the mission hospital as a sort of a liability, because we are not really administrators in the sense that we cannot claim to be Christians and also sternly establish a hierarchical system that is needed for a successful, profitable administration. Yeah, so I think trying to hide from these challenges is what most mission hospitals are doing and therefore are not able to cope with it.
So, what do you think now that takes us into our next topic of the relevance, actually? So, initially, the relevance was that in a nation which was predominantly filled with the darkness of Hinduism, the gospel and the missionaries used the mission hospitals as beacons of light to bring the seeds of the gospel into the hearts of the people. Probably the relevance was that then. Do you think there is a relevance now in the present healthcare scenario the country is facing, with the government systems? coming up into the villages, and the government apparatus has improved in its services, or so to say. What do you think is the relevance right now?
Even as you're asking this question, I'm thinking of what could be a good comparison. I think it's similar to how malnutrition has evolved over the years. So, well, we must not deny that there were very, very vibrant health systems in India, even when the missionaries came. And in the initial phases, I think what we like, it wasn't evidence based like we do now, right? So, a lot of that was also mm, either superstitious or experimental or somewhere in between. So, I think what really caught the attention of the society was not primarily the superiority of the medical system, but the love that with which it was administered. The service element was certainly lacking in a country like India, which I think the missionaries opened out. So, like the Great Plague of Rome, where everybody fled, but the Christians flocked to Rome. So, a lot of impact was not because of successful medical treatment, but with the attention and love that went into it. And I think that is a relevance that is eternal, like it will never die out. But then, like I was already saying, if we seek to be self-sufficient and as the church often expects profitable, then that creates an intrinsic um, conflict of interest in how we are able to administer that care to the patients, and so that can be a challenge. I also think that, like, of course, starvation as malnutrition, as I was saying, is now sort of phased out by giving everybody lots of rice at 1 rupee or whatever. But malnutrition is still a problem because we have really not taught people how to approach nutrition in an informed way. So now childhood obesity is the problem. Like that, there is now too much of healthcare available. I mean, I'm not very experienced, like you rightly said, in the more difficult parts of the country. Most of North India is is a stranger to me. But in the south, I think we suffer a lot from childhood malnutrition in the sense of obesity. So there are a lot of health facilities, a lot of them probably doing unnecessary health interventions, and that is still not a problem, except when there is somebody who needs a real health intervention and who has something else given. So, say for example, in Odanchatra, uh, where I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with my friend Vinay, we were no longer seeing uh, fractures primarily, but we would endlessly see uh, post-operative osteomyelitis and things like that. And such such poor outcome medical illnesses, um, I think it is our duty to take it on ourselves, knowing that we may not be able to really, or palliative care for that matter. There's so much of development in palliative care on the one hand, but it almost seems like a boycott by the medical community in India to reach out to patients who are suffering with no hope or no certainty of cure. But then they still need treatment. So I think the relevance should shift, and we must always be like like one of my great gurus, Dr. John, would say, there is no competition if you are trying to serve in an area of need. And that is still a vast vacuum, if I may say. If rather than us being uh, superfluous, actually there is a very large unmet need as relates to poor outcome or iatrogenic medical illness. And that I think if we don't do it, nobody will do it.
So when you say area of need, you don't mean a new area, right? Like the area that the mission hospital is already in, there are other places of opportunity, or like as you said, palliative care or pediatric care, post-operative.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
mean like, of course, there must be that, there definitely
yeah. There's
must be in a
obviously, yeah,
country like India
there must be.
unreached medical fields, but that's not what I was talking
Yeah.
about. I was talking about like Baptist hospitals in a city with a lot of medical facilities, but nobody willing to actually reach out to particular large pockets of people who cannot be cured.
Another thing, Paul, I've kept hearing these statements from many mission hospitals that doctor was not committed. What is your understanding of a committed Christian doctor? What is the commitment to, or to whom? Many doctors keep leaving mission hospitals. I mean, they finish their bond and they move on. And probably they were led by God to move on genuinely. But then you hear the mission hospital people complaining and saying things like, yeah, he had a lack of commitment. Get, what do you think
Yeah,
of that?
that's a little sudden for for a very concise answer, but I would generally, I think we should not approach Christianity in clearly defined compartments. Commitment is not only for doctors and it's not only professionally. So, like in the Bible, for example, we have the two great saints of the New Testament, Saint Peter and Saint Paul. And one person's calling was to remain put in one place, and another person's was to keep going from one place to another. It may be difficult to communicate um, the inner sense of purpose and calling that anybody has, not necessarily a doctor has, um, with everybody around. And I'm not sure who's listening to our conversation, but I resent the idea that doctors are somehow thought of as income generating uh, persons, and not primarily as, as fellow Christians. So, in the few mission hospitals that I've worked, or which I'm sure is true for most mission hospitals, doctors are primarily the people who have uh, moved from familiarity, from native places, and from a sense of a community of care in order to be in the mission hospital. Not only, but often, and therefore, um, people who are local to that mission hospital may never really understand the challenges faced by somebody who has come from somewhere else just to be there. Now, this is not to set up immigration or whatever as some very lofty, unachievable, or pedestalized form of Christianity, but then it is a challenge. There is no denying that. Like, say, for example, just take the idea of leaves. A hospital which blanketly gives equal amount of leaves um, puts the doctor at a tremendous disadvantage, because, like, if I need to attend a family wedding or a function which relates to my church even, I need to take leave to be there, unlike the people who are from the locality.
They could just take
They
a half
just,
day.
yeah, so some people just pile up tremendous amounts of leave and get it encashed, and then the doctor has no such privilege. And then, therefore, in that context, to bring up the idea that, oh, the doctors are getting paid more, what about equality on this side? Like, so nobody has said that to me, I think, or not directly. I may have refused to get their indirect hints about whether I have commitment or not. But I am convinced that God calls some people to be committed to a particular locality or a particular mission hospital. But I would very much strongly disagree with the idea that that is the only way in which God may use a doctor or anybody for his work. So it is difficult to stay and it is easy to fall out or retreat or whatever you want to put it as. I'm not denying that I have often felt the temptation, or probably many times succumbed to the temptation to to give up. Um, but um, like the church and the mission hospital is an extension of the church, success or failure is a joint experience. God will never, God will never allow His work to be limited by an individual's failure. Is how I understand it. Therefore, if a mission hospital has to deal with or experience or suffer from what is perceived as a doctor who should have remained or should have come or done more, I think if that one member of the body is hurting, like we read in Ephesians, so the whole body should hurt. There is no place for accusation or confrontation, but need for sympathy and prayer. Does that answer?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I think the understanding of a committed Christian doctor should, as you said, extend to all Christians, all convinced Christians, that their commitment is ultimately to God and His Word.
And also, if I may add, even for a Christian doctor, or even for a pastor, or even a missionary for that matter, our primary identity, of course, comes from being children of God. But next to that, I think our primary identity or our allegiance or our duty is to our families. So I cannot, I would like, it would be very difficult to talk me out of my obligation to my family in order to keep for the sustenance of a medical mission hospital. If I am not able to fulfill my duty to my wife and children, uh, however, how much ever success I may have in the medical mission, uh, it would still be a loss. Like I was just reading the verse in front of the admin, like, if a man gains the whole world and loses his own soul, by extension, I think if he loses his family, then it's not going to be a very rewarding experience at the end of it. Or I don't think God, like, if we agree that marriage and parenthood are God given responsibilities, I don't think He Himself would put it against our professional or even religious responsibility. It should be an integral whole that, that goes together.
I think it is the family is an important area of stewardship. To we have to be faithful as stewards. As you since you spoke about family, that will be a nice way to enter into our next topic, which is uh, the challenges of a family living in a mission hospital setting. So there are always challenges of things like loneliness, low pay maybe, and long working hours and overworked single doctor running the hospital and the wife being alone and maybe not having that companionship or the children not having the father around. So what do you, have you faced any challenges personally, and what do you think would be challenges to a family thinking of entering into mission?
Yes, while I was in Baptist, I was not family, and also it's sort of like remote in my memory. I can't remember much. But in Odinchachram, we were very blessed in the sense that the hospital itself did not lay unrealistic demands on us, on me at least. But I myself had to deal with a lot of. I would feel very guilty to take leave or uh, not immediately attend to a patient who perhaps was not an emergency medically, but it will definitely be convenient for the patient to be seen as soon as they come. And I used to feel that somehow if I am there, I should do it with all my heart, all my soul, all my strength, and all my mind. And usually the yeah the brunt of it is borne by the family. So um, there's a lot of wisdom I learned by working in a place like Open Chatram, because there were people who were much senior, who had experienced a lot in their own lives and seen a lot of good work, um, and they also knew the cost that the family had to pay for it. So one of the things that really helped us was that Jasmine was not working. Um, I don't think how it could have been possible if both of us were working. Now that is not to say that everybody may have the same limitations or abilities. So, say for example, mm, the sheer deception of numbers. Uh, I was very comfortably disillusioned in Odenchatra by seniors that like one doctor may be able to see 10 patients a day, another may be able to see 40. Uh, there is no shame in having to see only 10 patients, or there is not necessarily always an achievement if you see 40. Ultimately, when we are in missions, we are certainly not there for the money or for the superficial accolade or appreciation. One seeks a sense of fulfillment, the joy of having done a job well, and that takes time, I think, in a way that the corporate approach to medical work may never realize. Um, like, like I even remember once um, I did I did this kind of a patient in Northern Chatran. There wasn't anything much, but that patient wanted to talk to me and wanted to pray for me. Um, of course, I was very humbled and reminded how less I prayed with my patients. But then I was not going to give up that opportunity to let a patient pray for me. And I knew that it means that, I will see less number of patients that day. But then that's okay, I think. Because if we are in missions and we are denied um, the freedom to spend as much time as we think is reasonable, which may be different with each patient, then there is nothing much to help us um, continue and persist in such a place. Right? So, yeah, I think I struggle with having to accept that, first of all, like you already pointed out, that I am not going to be a surgeon. Like, I'm not going to do anything very life transforming to a patient. And even in the scans that I did, that I may not always make uh, not only fancy diagnosis, but even perhaps the best diagnosis or the most complete diagnosis. But that was okay. I had to learn to tell myself that I should be satisfied with what I did for each patient, which is more important than the number of patients I saw. And then I had to set time aside for family. So it was difficult in the sense that I was not spending a lot of time in the nights with patients, but then almost every night I would have to go in with patients, and that was sort of like getting on to me. And I don't think what I did was wrong, but I also don't think that I should have gone on doing it for the rest of my life. So I'm quite happy to feel that there are certain phases in which God expects and strengthens us to do certain things, which we may not be able to do in every phase of our life, and that's okay. But what we must not attempt to do, I feel, is to try and do in our own strength at a phase in life uh, that God has not determined, the very thing that He enabled us to do at a certain specific phase in life because of a specific need. Say, for example, internship. I can't think of myself as being able to do internship all over again, and it would be really silly to think that I could be able to. I should force myself to go without sleep like that. But it was important then, and something else is important now. And yeah, it's difficult to accept change, especially if change means statistically doing less. But I think that is where we are. That's important for us to realize that it's God's mission and not our mission, and that we have a small, uh, thankfully not negligible, but not a very important role in God's mission.
I think more difficult a decision for the women, you think, because now in your case it was a different scenario where your wife was not a doctor, but many couples where the wife is also equally educated, maybe a PG, done a PG or another post, a super specialty, and for them to take a step back while raising children, these, could it be a challenge? Could it be a difficult decision?
Yeah, I think it is a very difficult decision to take. Say, for example, yeah, I can only talk from my own experience. So, already you start off at something like a disadvantage when you are in a real mission hospital, of course, where the work. By the way, when I say work, I'm again not referring to stats. I'm referring to availability. Doesn't really match with the income, and I think a lot of doctor couples in Odinchadram, for example, where I work, sought to overcome the economic challenge by both the parents working. And that is even an offer that was made to us actually. Yeah, I mean, my wife is a dentist, and I think the dentistry department, while we were still there, was not in a dire need. But then they were offering to give her a job because within their legal framework, it was a way in which they could help us to have a little more money than we did. And yeah, I am very appreciative of their intentions and their willingness to take on that extra burden on the institution to help us as a family to grow. But yeah, I think we made the choice that we would not send our children to daycare or childcare facilities at least till they were 5 years old, and we would we would definitely not delegate parenting to anyone else. So then we had to, of course, we can't have it always. So then we had to give up certain things in order to be able to do that. Um, so yes, we did have household help and things like that, but then, and then it is always easy to give up child rearing to others because it's quite stressful and we feel like we need a break. But yeah, we decided that we will give up everything else, um, housekeeping, travel, food, just so that you know the, at least one parent's undivided attention the child would get. And I know that I know that it is it's very partial to women that way. But it's also a way in which we can really unravel the mystery of chauvinism in the Bible, because while it is true that if the way I certainly understand the Bible about women not getting to preach and do leadership roles in the church, I would rephrase it like that, that women are released from inferior spiritual work, which may be preaching, so that they are free to do the lofty spiritual work of actually parenting. And if it is done well, I think it is like a 24/7 job. So, yes, it is a very difficult, costly job, but it is perhaps the most important function, not only of a doctor's family, of the church at large, that our children are brought up in the faith. Um, yeah, I'm very appreciative of women who are willing to. I think a lot of women, the right sort of women, know that in their hearts that their primary role and responsibility is with the family and the children. The challenge is being able to effectively convince or even communicate that to the either to the mission hospital or to the church or sometimes to the family as well. That I think is an area where at least the husbands can step in and how should I say, fulfill an apologetic role and um, and take on the responsibility of having made the decision. So, like, I would try to always defend Jasmine by saying, no, it is a choice that I made and we made, but I am fully in line with that choice, and I think it's important for her to do this. And usually, I think in-laws or whoever may not disagree with the son-in-law, like they may disagree with the daughter. Yeah, it is costly, but I think it is really putting our money where it, what's that phrase? Yeah, it is the right kind of investment.
Yeah. But more and more, we see that there's doctor couples um, getting married later, getting children much later into because probably one of them is finishing up a PG, and then by the time the children come up, they're already quite old, and then they have to get back to the workplace. So, and maybe there is something more at play here. Do you think? Do you think the adversary has kind of engineered everything to bring in public education as a tool to probably break down the family structure?
Hmm.
Because after all, he is like a roaring lion and he's walking to and fro, seeing whom he may devour. It says. Do you think
Yeah.
there's something more at hand here at play?
Hmm. I really think
Because
I ought to
I
let you talk about it, but I do. I acknowledge. I mean, I'm sure you can explain what you are thinking of particular to this, but I think that you made a very important point that especially within the church and in the mission hospital, it's easy to see humans as the problem and forget the supernatural and sort of be blinded to the meta narrative or the warfare that is unseen. And I think we should take every opportunity to pause and reflect on what may be happening around which we are not really aware of. Yes, the public education system, the way it is done now, mm, can be a challenge to the family as God intended it to be, perhaps. But I think you need to give me a little more detail on that.
yeah, about like what made you decide on homeschooling? Let's start there. Initially, you thought of homeschooling as a priority over sending them to daycare or school and then going into the workplace. Right? You had a decision to make there. So, what was the? I mean, there was so many variables at play probably. So, which one did you emphasize on, or which was the priority?
Well, the point I want to emphasize most is that I don't think it was in any way an achievement or uh, some some great sacrificial decision that we made. So both Jasmine and mine, our mothers were housewives. We are not from a medical family, and so I think that is that is something that God blessed us with which many of my friends may not have. So on both sides, the family was very particular and supportive of the fact that in early childhood at least the children should spend their entire time with the parents. But not only in this, often I found that sometimes God God gives us a burden in the heart, or gives us a sense of direction, which is difficult to understand or explain. But along the line, you realize that
Yeah.
He shows, or to put it in another way, we must first be willing to get out of the boat and walk on water.
And in retrospect, we may understand.
Yeah, to be actually finally be able to walk on water. So then we saw how we saw how surrogate parenting happened, and the way children mm, were challenged with from simple things like hygiene and vocabulary and screen time and to later on things where primarily the child feels comfortable and attached to the governess or the caregiver rather than to the parent. And then therefore, as humans, I think what really influences our practical choices, or who we choose to imitate, or who we set up as a role model, will definitely be somebody who we look up to and can relate. So at once we must, as parents, be people who the children can look up to. Means the lines have to be drawn very clearly. But you could push it to an extreme where we become unapproachable. Um, that is not ideal, I think. But the opposite extreme also may not be ideal, where we are so approachable, like we tend to become the maids for the children, and our primary
And the
role
playmates.
becomes, yeah. So yeah, since we were family was supportive, and both of us were the last in our families, and we had seen how um, all our I mean my sister, all our siblings and in-laws had made the same choice, and it was not particularly an out-of-the-box choice that we had to make. But uh, yeah, um, yeah, I think um, like we say that there is a connection that forms even in utero. I think the first gospel is the non-verbal gospel. I mean, the child has to be met with that that like how can you show unconditional love to a child um, when you don't have words? It's only by spending time in service. And none of us are should take it for granted that we will have our children grow up into adulthood and uh, will be able to make well, I come from a church where we believe in adult believers baptism, but it's only a very, 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 very recent given that children always make it into adulthood. Right? For most of human history, it was not that. So how do we show the gospel to a child except by being there all the time? I wish we had the opportunity to share it and do it, but then I'm glad that at least since I was not available to do it all the time, at least to their mother. And I certainly think that women are far better at doing it than men. Naturally also, but also in terms of outcomes.
So since we are on the topic of homeschooling, I would like to ask you. I mean, firstly, I would like to say why I decided personally on homeschooling. There is one of the major things was the public systems were indoctrinating in a way, which was bringing the world's ideology into the family, into the home, and then we had more and more lesser time with the children to maybe feed their brains with our own biblical doctrine. So in a way, the world was taking more time than the family.
Hmm.
So that was one thing, and the other thing is education has become very overrated, I think, because of the costs that are involved. I mean, if you see, even primary schooling is costing way into lakhs and lakhs every year. And for mission hospital couples, I don't think it's an economical decision to make. What do you think of that?
Yeah,
Apart from
yeah. So
several reasons,
even as
maybe.
we are talking about it, I think it sort of illustrates a point that I was making before, that it is only in Christ that we are able to sit and disagree calmly about things,
Hmm.
and to realize that God is not so boring that He has laid out the same road for all of us, and we shouldn't expect Him to do it. I do agree that a lot of time is spent away from family, in school and at work for that matter. And especially as medical mission becomes more and more sophisticated and sort of hmm, specialized and super specialized and whatnot, um, it can be a kind of slavery, a yoke. Um, so I'm not now talking about what we are doing, but what I perceive as the ideal. So all true identity comes from Trinity. Like the Trinity is the core to
Hmm.
understand relationships, and then by extension the church. So the church, in my idea, should be like a joint family where um, all education, or almost all education, is in the context
Hmm.
of the knowledge about God.
Yeah.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, or whatever. And then, so if you think of the history of the church, for example, it is monks who wanted to spend time in prayer and Bible study, who then went on to take care of the sick and started schools and teaching. So there they at once acknowledge the value of well, secular has a lot of meanings now, a
Yeah.
sort of non-theological education,
Education. Yeah.
and they were willing that you know there were other people who may not share their calling, uh, but they also didn't lose focus on the fact that their primary job was with got to do with God and all that. So yes, it is if we send children to school expecting that they will either become intelligent or well mannered, I think we will be very disappointed
Hmm.
and deceived. Um,
But what do you think about social interaction? Many parents have this doubt.
so yes, for ourselves at least, I think that primary or underlying to any discussion on education should be our willingness to admit that each child is unique, and just like we are all called to different vocations in life, or just like the church is made up of multiple members who all constitute one body, there is no one stop solution for the educational needs of a child. So each child will have some areas of strength and some areas of weakness, and we have, by being in Odanchatram, I think we have been very blessed to see children who shone in homeschooling. Like it brought out the best in them, and they were natural leaders,
Hmm.
and they were very good at handling uh, the public, differences of opinion and things like that. And maybe some of it is inherited, or maybe some of it is because of the home environment as well. Um, but I don't think that works for every type of child. So ultimately, one of our homeschooling friends said this, that we are bringing up children not so that they will end up as children, no, that they will be grown-ups. And as Christian children, I think we are bringing them up primarily, of course, to know God themselves, which is like a non-negotiable. But next to that, to primarily be witnesses of God's love in whatever society they are in. And there is only so much of exclusivity that we can give them um, before they completely lose being relevant to the society that they are brought in. So now I know that I am sitting in a mission hospital where people much bigger and greater than I have, and I think it was really, I don't think I will ever be able to comprehend the kind of devotion and sacrificial spirit they must have had in coming to a country full of disadvantages. But I think they set up a system which was good. I'm not denying that it had anything good at all, but which we cannot mindlessly adopt. The whole system of sending children away for higher education back to England, or like my church, mainly missionaries came from England. And so apart from their very early childhood, then they would completely separate for the sake of education. If they didn't go all the way to England, they would certainly go all the way to Hebron. So that they will be able to. So here again, these two factors are interplaying. One is the acknowledgement that not everybody is called to be a missionary. So their children had to be prepared for a life that they may have to lead back in a different society where they're able to connect with the rest of the population and engage them in a meaningful way as witnesses, which means that they may have to spend time away from parents. But that has sort of become a missionary legacy in India, where missionary parents, actually, I think as doctors, we have more say in how we handle our children. I really pity the missionaries who have to force their children to be left behind in South India as they go and serve God in North India. And I know that it's a very painful, difficult choice for them to make, and I'm not at all like questioning either their calling or their guidance, but I wouldn't want to accept it as a given. Uh, how should I say, an axiomatic model for mission families. So yes, children have to spend a lot of time with their own parents. And say, for example, my children, I think Jasmine and I both are, at least we feel that we are quite socially incapacitated, even disabled. We are very bad at dealing with people who are different than ourselves, who are simply just expressive and loud about their lifestyles. And since both of us are like that already, it is a disadvantage that we would very much like to limit in our children. And it's not only school. If you think of it, like, say, for example, it is something that you can think about as social media, or whatever, or entertainment. You would rather introduce it to the children while they are still predominantly under your influence, and teach them how to handle it, than keep them completely unexposed and naive, and then it suddenly lands on them and they're not prepared for it. Now, I know that we cannot definitely address there will always be surprises, and there will definitely be ways in which we cannot completely prepare them for in every way. But since this is something that we ourselves feel challenged even now on a daily basis, we really want them to hope that they will have that advantage, that we feel that we didn't have. But we went to regular schools and we still ended
Yeah, I
up
know.
like
We
that.
all
So
went to regular school.
schooling or homeschooling in isolation may not be a solution or a problem,
Hmm.
but definitely a lot of thought, prayer, and intentionality should go into it.
Into making that decision.
And
Right?
yeah, and then of course offering it up to God, who can change even our evil into His purposes. About the world entering the house through the school, yeah, it is sadly true. I don't know if you can cut this part out of the video if you want. I often say that child marriage is a good thing.
Hmm.
Because almost every Indian, if you think, who has ever achieved, was married as a child,
Yeah.
from Gandhi to Tagore to Bharatiyar to whoever. Because I think education is more and more now perceived as as like, it seems like the whole education career system works simply to sort of like increase your prospects on the marriage market,
Hmm.
and that is a very sad way uh, to uh, to
Approach marriage.
approach
Yeah.
both marriage and vocation. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, and then I think that is what leads to what you are consequently saying as delay in marriage and
Hmm.
delay
Yeah.
in willingness to accept responsibilities of parenthood and things like that. Um, yeah, if it was difficult for us, I think it will definitely be even more difficult for our children, and
Hmm.
I think that it's a very it's something that should force us on our knees, the kind of world our children may have to face. But at least now I think there is one thing that we can be grateful for, um, which I think our parents' generation were not. Like, um, overall, I think Christianity in India perceived that moving to the West gave a sort of um, advantage or security from adverse. Like, they were perceived. West was perceived as a Christian
Yeah.
society, and where Christian values were implemented, and therefore a good environment for children to be brought up. And I think in our time now we are quite disillusioned about that.
Hmm.
If anything, it is a disadvantage and a factor that plays against living out the faith.
I've had cousins who would get onto the plane when their term, deliver their just to get the citizenship, and
Yeah,
then and think that that's the best thing they can do for their children. Yeah, but about child marriage, I seem to agree on a few things you've said, because when I look back,
really, is this fit for the audience?
it's okay. I
Huh.
mean, we are being candid, so I think that marriages are being more and more delayed because of education, and I think education has brought upon society a kind of a prolonged, let's say, childhood or adolescence. So men and women are not becoming men and women at the right age or when they have to, and because they're stuck in colleges or in academic places, they are just prolonging their childhood, and this is kind of affected, I think, more badly women than men, because women have they straight away enter into a marriage where neither of them have prepared for. They've not even become mature enough as adults or men and women, and they enter into these marriages, and then it's like all the issues that come in with that kind of an immaturity that you enter in. And I think education, like I've said before, there is a lot of interdimensional play going on, I feel, that the devil is using the educational systems to kind of prolong the period of maturity into adults. Because
Hmm.
when you think of the child marriages or Gandhis or all these people, the Tagores, they actually were mature enough to get married also when they were
But
so
they were
called.
joint families.
Yeah.
So yeah, that also brings us to another sort of controversial idea of. I come from a church where it seems to be like, since we believe in individual conversions, we seem to, it seems to, or people think that it automatically means nuclear families, but that is not the pattern we see in the Bible at all. Like, say for example, even the most Christ-like character in the Old Testament, according to me and some others, Joseph. If we read the passage where Joseph takes his sons to be blessed by Jacob, and then you see the contrast between the spiritual experiences of Joseph and Jacob has been quite a disastrous person, and Joseph has always been like, the unsullied light. But Joseph also was very much more achieved than his father, even on a worldly sense, right? So Joseph was spiritually and secularly his superior to his father.
Yeah.
But then Jacob says, "No, I'm going to cross my hands," and Joseph accepts that. Somehow we now feel that marriage releases us from submission to parents. I strongly disagree with it. Of course, I don't know what it means to those whose parents are not Christians, but it's the easiest thing to say that our parents are unconverted and therefore we will not listen to them. That's a temptation that we should watch out against. So, what is marriage? Like what you're saying brings out the shifting perception of what marriage really is. What marriage was perceived as in the Bible, I think is different from what Indians perceive marriage as on very significant points. But within the Indian secular idea itself, what marriage is has been undergoing a lot of a paradigm shift, if I may say so, where it is simply it is simply a kind of insurance. And therefore, yeah, I do agree. I mean, I'm not sure that education is the reason that maturity is delayed. But yeah, like you say, it prevents us from dealing with challenges in life, which is the only way to gain maturity, or knowledge can definitely never be a substitute for wisdom, and wisdom has got to do with experience.
But I mean, it's the pretense of it. I mean, like the devil uses a pretext, like the intentions. The intentions are always good, like this, like how Lewis would have said it. The streets of hell are paved with good intentions. Was that Lewis? I don't know. Yeah, but then the devil has a pretext to everything, that this is going to be good, but then ultimately maybe it takes us away from God. Yeah, but then you had mentioned something about shifting locations, right? So I would like to get your take on this verse from Acts chapter 17, verse 26, where it says that Paul's sermon on Mars Hill, where he says that he has set the boundaries of our habitation or our dwelling place. And do you think, is that like a geographical boundary or a cultural boundary? Because at the Tower of Babel, the boundaries were set with language, right? So language created a boundary. So do you think that there are, I mean, how I would like to think of it is like, there are so many things in our life that we can change, we can decide upon. But there's something that has been fixed by God, like the time when we were born into this world, the area in which we were born. These were fixed, right? These were in the predetermined counsel of God. We would agree upon that. So when Paul says that he has fixed the boundaries, what do you think of that? Do you think Christian doctors should stay in India and take it as God's will upon them that they should minister to their fellow Indians to bring them the light? Or do you think they can, the world is a playground or whatever?
Here again, I'm not sure that I want to confine the question to Christian doctors. It is a question that every Christian may have to answer. But then the sorrow of Christian doctors is that it somehow gives us, or is perceived to give us, an advantage of choice that other professionals may not have. That we can stay or leave as we want. That I think is a disadvantage, not an advantage, because it is not through the multiplication of options that right choices are made.
It only increases the ambiguity, I think.
Yes. So it is simpler to eat home food where you know what you're going to eat than to have to choose in a restaurant like that. But about so there are two ways in which one may be one may feel the need or the prompt to move, right? So one is the great missionary movement where people knew, and the reason why that we are even having this conversation
that was the Great Commission, obviously.
Somebody was willing to go beyond their borders. But does that apply to Indian doctors now is a very difficult question to answer, I think. Or not a difficult question to answer, it's a complicated question to answer. Like, if I am talking to some young people in my church, for example, there are very few instances in the Jewish church. Now, we can't take the New Testament church so much in this regard, because it was the New Testament essentially carries one generation information, right? But the Jewish church is very long. So every instance of advantageous emigration, if you may say it, where an Israelite or a Jewish person went to live in a more prosperous country, it is always through slavery or exile. Joseph was taken to Egypt as a slave. Daniel went to Babylon as a slave. And though they went from slavery or from a third world country, as they may have thought of then, to sort of the pinnacle of civilization, they were sad about it, and their heart was back there in the third world, if you may say. So how do we really, I can't see of emigration for advantage as anything that has a precedence in the Bible. And I'm not therefore denying, like we already agreed, that God is big enough for each of us to have unique special paths and plans. But to say that it is based, if anybody said to me, for example, I feel called or led to go to such a place and work, I would not disagree. But the moment that they would step out of that and say that it's a biblical principle, then I would definitely have to strongly disagree. That in the incarnation itself teaches us that our movement, if at all, should always be into more and more disadvantage and suffering. And I don't know whether I have talked to you about it before, or I'm sure you may have realized it yourself, that right now more people live in India than the population of the entire world at the time when the New Testament was written. Go into all the world. So
the world has come here.
Yeah. So we now have more humans living in India than St. Paul could have reached had he traveled the whole world. And then from leaving a country full of opportunities to sparsely populated places where that in as an ideology, I sort of I can't understand it. It doesn't seem to make sense. But about the privilege of choice, like you pointed out, thankfully, I think God has kept all the major choices of our lives beyond our reach. Like you said, like birth, heritage, ancestry, time, and things like that. And it would be very silly to think that I mean, I will find it difficult to believe in a God who was sort of inconsistent. That if he wanted me to to work in a particular place, unless there was some extraordinarily exceptional reason, he would not he would not plan my childhood to be completely disconnected and in isolation from the place in which he has prepared for me, right? Unless, of course, I was going to that place as a missionary.
Yeah.
Like Amy Carmichael is said to have had brown eyes, right?
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, Amy Carmichael had brown eyes.
Okay.
And she was told in Sunday school that nothing is impossible with God, and she used to pray as a child every night that she would have blue eyes like the rest of her siblings. And then it took many years before she understood why she had brown eyes, because it helped her to actually spread coffee powder and go into the Hindu temples where no non-caste Hindus were allowed, and find out things and sometimes rescue children. But that's exceptional. If some Indians are born with blue eyes, I think maybe they are entitled to think that they were meant to live in countries where people have blue eyes. But as a general principle,
Yeah, I think
like
it
we
should be
already,
led by an
yeah,
opportunity for the gospel instead of an opportunity for a worldly thing. Like
Yeah.
let's not say worldly, but yeah, secular.
yeah, and every time that choice involves a worldly advantage, it must set us on guard. Say, for example, even in the choice of a medical profession,
Yeah.
any number of Christians or parents of Christian children want their children to study medicine because they claim that they want them to be medical missionaries. And then I sadly know a lot of those children who never became missionaries. And then if our primary identity as missionaries is doctors, then we have failed
really
in
sad.
our own mission.
Yeah.
So if a God wants my child to be a missionary, then if he is going to be a housekeeper missionary, that should be no shame or disadvantage. I am, but recently as in the past few years in Shiloh, we have Anil Cherian sir and Shalini ma'am who are in South Sudan, who are medical missionaries from India to countries that are even more disadvantaged than India. And then he was sharing some statistics which I'm not probably accurate, but India apparently has the second largest number of Christian medical personnel in the world.
Wow.
Like it's only the US which has more medical people who are Christians. And it is good if Christian medical people in India are reaching out to other Indians. But I think stats prove otherwise, that we concentrate in the south, into areas of already a lot of Christian witness.
Yeah.
So he was saying that, of course, reach out to unreached India, but don't confine yourselves to unreached India. India is certainly not the poorest, or definitely not medically disadvantaged as many other places in the world are. And if anybody feels that call, I think that I should love to see somebody take it on themselves to go and do it. Which is interestingly something that I said about my marriage. So we had a very arranged marriage. So then the pastor who brought up the proposal said that she's a very good girl. And then I said, yeah, she may just be too good a girl for me, in the sense that it is possible that God has called her to be a medical missionary in sub-Saharan Africa.
Okay.
And I don't have that call, and I should hate to be the reason why she can't fulfill that call because of me. So, yeah, I think education, marriage, all that should play into our individual identity of what God has called us to be. And thankfully, like you already mentioned it, by having to relinquish or give up surgery, it helped me realize that God is not conditional, both in the way in which He accepts our service and in the way in which He is willing to use our services. And that is something that I told you when we were talking about the discussion, but I'm not sure that I brought it up, that God's primary mission in our lives is to ourselves.
Yeah, you were not.
And through work, through family, through situations, through society, through all that happens in our lives, it is God trying to reach us. Um, Sometimes, as people who believe in being born again, we sort of think that that is like clearing the need, and therefore nothing much needs to be done. But I think sanctification or transformation is as important in salvation as justification, and that is the little part in which God has allowed us to participate in. And that is a thought that has really set me free in so many ways. That
Yeah, I think the greatest ministry of the indwelling spirit is in the self itself. Yeah, there's so much work to be done there.
yeah.
Yeah, so I think we're coming to the end of this conversation, which has been very fruitful. There's a lot of wisdom that we could get to hear from you. I would like you to kind of give us an exposition on a short verse from Hebrews chapter 11. The Bible there testifies about Moses, and it says there that he chose afflictions rather than the pleasures of sin in Egypt. So, what do you think about the choices that we can make in life, more practical choices? There's so many choices that a young believer has to face: um, marriage, the field of work, the PG, which hospital, which place to settle in, whether to go abroad or stay in India. So many choices along the way. So, what do you think? Even I think William Carey once wrote to his sister when there was a death in his family, and he said that I would rather choose affliction rather than sin. What do you think of that line?
Okay, so that's a very loaded multi-part question. I'll take it from the last sentence you made. I
We
would
can have
rather
another
choose
podcast on
affliction
that.
than sin. Now, what is sin? To a believer, I think now we are set free from the law in the sense that we are no longer thinking of sin as murder or adultery. Or,
Yeah.
of course, that is all sin, but that is not only sin. So, disobedience to God's call, if we have it, is sin. But at the same time, obedience should not be because of a sense of guilt or fear or punishment. Like we were reading in the morning.
Yeah, there's
Perfect
no
love casts out fear.
fear. Yeah.
So, if we are doing God's will, there is certainly joy in it.
Yeah.
And joy is, of course, as anybody with some exposure to Christianity will know, that it's not happiness, but there is joy. I mean, there's an inner sense of fulfillment, of not achievement maybe, but acceptance from
Yeah,
God.
that could even be in adversity, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
especially in adversity.
Especially in that.
So, yeah, the Bible is really marvelous in that. No, like, so the Hebrew account of what happened to Father Moses or even Lord is gives you, I think, gives you God's take on what happened in history. And as much as we believe in that, we must not discount or negate how it played out in human terms. What did actually Moses do? He killed an Egyptian and fled. And I'm sure he came to a mature understanding of it later on, but um, it was not. It was not in spite of that mistake. It was probably through the mistake that he made that God brought him to that realization. And then we cannot really take Moses out in isolation like that. Well, if we were to take that literally to mean that we must always scorn luxury and choose slavery, one, we sort of like we sort of set up an artificial contradiction in Moses's calling itself. Like, yes, he chose temporarily to identify himself with slavery, but the purpose of that is liberation. So if he was like, you can, some of us, I think, who come to mission have a sort of a, what should you call it, an ascetic or puritanical streak in us, that we can tend to enjoy affliction for the mere sake of affliction. It gives us it's not, well, I shouldn't say us, certainly it does give me a sense
Yeah, a sense of kind of
achievement simply to be uncomfortable. That, I think, is not primarily meant by that verse. So yes, he chose to accept slavery, the identity,
but for a bigger purposes.
Yes, for liberation. And also a lot of, how should I say, well, I don't know, maybe it's time for you to wind up your podcast, but then it brings on to more thoughts about mission. What set apart Ida Scudder or Amy Carmichael or William Carey, even for that matter, or all these great pioneers we're talking about? I think one common thing is that they were all brought up outside the institutions that they founded. And it was very intentional of God for Moses to have spent most of his life in the palace and then in the wilderness, and very little along with fellow Hebrews. And a lot of the time when we are trying to continue an institution, and it feels like we are not achieving enough when compared to the pioneers. But I think God conditionally set them apart like that. Like, I can sort of with firm conviction say that if Amy Carmichael herself were brought up in Donavur, she would have never set up Donavur. Or for that matter, all the other people who did pioneering work. So yes, we need to identify ourselves not primarily with slavery or freedom, but with the Church of God. And if at that point in time, that is the identity of God's church, I must be willing to identify myself completely with that. But we can't say that that is always the only way. Like, how would you apply something like that to, say, for example, Daniel? Does that mean that Daniel has to go back from Babylon, which I think where his heart was, in Jerusalem? But that was not the role that God had specified for him. So, like you yourself have said previously, and like now we said about joy, joy involves, like, there must be a setting of adversity or affliction for joy, for us to be able to distinguish joy from happiness. Similarly, I think joy also involves a kind of surrender. Now, definitely we know that the things, like, we know that surrender of pleasure and comfort and better prospects in life is involved in the way of the cross, but sometimes it may also be surrender in terms of affliction as well. So we could just push it, we could idolize affliction in a sense that is unhealthy for ourselves and for God to fulfill our purposes in this world. We exist primarily to serve God, and in practical ways to serve the church. And if, as a doctor, it gives me some social advantage, I should not hesitate to use that advantage to God's service, though my own heart may be to serve him in some other capacity as a martyr, or if you take laying down one's life, sayings, the good shepherd lays down his life, or greater love has no man than this. Martyrdom is a one-time easy idea. I don't know what it is to experience it, of course, but as an idea, it's easy because it is done once, and for anything that can be done once, one can always feel the satisfaction of having accomplished it. But laying down one's life may also, I think, to me, it means giving all my time or living out my life in surrender. And surrender can be in both ways, both the surrender of comfort as well as the surrender of adversity, to so that ultimately it is God's purpose which is fulfilled. So yes, Saint Paul had to be in prison, but there also had to be Philemon for him to write the letter to who was in state and things like that. And I think none of us should aspire to be to be able to have an opinion or make choices for anyone else. Many who are first shall be last, etc. It is a great blessing that we ourselves are given any direction and the privilege of choice and achievement.
Yeah. I think when we enter into a relationship with God, I mean, through the born again experience, we tend to think after a while that we are bringing something of value to the relationship. We keep forgetting that we were helpless people when we came to the cross, and we don't continue in the same state of helplessness. Maybe sometimes we earn a kind of self-worth that our martyrdom, as you said, or our affliction actually contributes to God's honor. But I don't think that's a healthy way of looking at it. Like as you said, yeah. The ultimate goal is the honor of God, I think, and if that, however form it comes or it takes, yeah. So that was really a very edifying discussion that we could have with you, Paul. And I must thank you personally for coming and visiting us here in Narsapur, all the way from Vellore. And we hope that we can have more interactions like this in the future. And we always would like to welcome you back onto the show. So,
And then now that you brought the show part of it, yeah, I a lot of conversations I think make more sense if there are real life scenarios to think about, and I should be glad to think along with somebody who may be having a real practical dilemma. Not that I have solutions, but I've been very blessed in the sense that I have got to see and listen to a lot of great people who I never am going to be, but I feel that that is a trust that is being given to me, that somehow a part of their life and message I should, like you are doing, like we should pass it on to the next gen. So yeah, I should be happy to be contacted for that in any way.
thank you so much, and
Thank
God
you.
bless you.